Post-structuralism. We have had a long discussion of structuralism, different aspects of structuralism, different aspects of structuralist theory, how it applied to language, how it applied to literature, and that took us almost 20 days to discuss. Now, this movement called post-structuralism, or this stance called post-structuralism, or this phase called post-structuralism, how do we make sense of this expression post-structuralism? Post refers to after. So obviously, in terms of time, in terms of chronology, in terms of period, maybe it refers to something which comes after structuralism. But still the word structuralism is attached to this post. So obviously there is some relationship between these two terms, structuralism and post-structuralism. So what is this relationship? One way of putting this relationship is to say that post-structuralism presents a kind of fuller working out of the implications of structuralism. That means post-structuralists are also structuralists, but in their theories, they work out fully the implications of structuralism. That is one way of putting this idea of post-structuralism. But there is another way how we can approach this concept post-structuralism. And what is that? Post-structuralists are structuralists who also realize their mistakes, who see their follies, who say problems in their ambition. And now they realize that, okay, there were problems in our stances on language, there were problems in our understanding of the world, and so we should better correct those follies, those mistakes. And that means post-structuralists try not to repeat the follies, the mistakes of structuralism. And this means that their position is entirely different from structuralism, though it never forgets structuralism, it takes off where structuralism leaves, and it takes some of those theories of language which structuralism propounded to their logical conclusion. So that means if structuralism could see up to a certain point, post-structuralists can see beyond that point to the farthest point possible. You understand this? Structuralists see up to a certain point, but post-structuralists see farther and farther, and they reach the end point, and they see what was involved in those structuralist theories and how far their implications can take a theorist. So this is the relationship between structuralism and post-structure. But there are other differences. One major difference is that structuralism basically borrowed from linguistics. We saw that Ferdinand de Saussure was a linguist. We saw that there were linguists who worked on those extinct American Indian languages. We saw that there were linguists who were working in Moscow, who were working in Prague. And we talked about three different varieties of linguistics in our discussion of structuralism. Linguistics as a subject believes in a kind of neat categorization of knowledge. Linguistics believes in description of its categories. Linguistics claims a certain kind of objectivity. So descriptive linguistics assumes that description is objective. That means the idea of objectivity and the idea of neatness, they go together with the discipline called linguistics. And hence you see that in structuralism, there is usually that neat division of categories, that neat division of text into categories, that neat division into signifier and signified. On the other hand, post-structuralism takes its lessons from philosophy. So it is not linguistics, but rather it is philosophy. And when it takes its lessons from philosophy, the subject becomes a very diffuse kind of affair. Philosophy does not tackle all problems in that kind of coherent manner as linguistics did. And hence you see that the nature of post-structuralism is very different from structuralism. We also see something about the intention of post-structuralism and structuralism. Try to think about the work of Northrop Frye. Try to think about the work of Claude Lévi-Strauss. Try to think about the work of Gerard Genette, or before that, the work of Propp and others, A.J. Grimus. What we see that they are trying to attempt a grammar of literature. They are trying to attempt some description of literary activities in a very neat manner. So that neatness, that neat classification, that ambition to discover the grammar of literature, it was all a very heroic kind of effort. So in its intentions, structuralism was very heroic. It talked about those universal categories. It talked about discovering grammar of literature, grammar of different forms of literature. And it was a very heroic effort. It was a very heroic intention. But post-structuralism tries to puncture that heroic spirit. It tries to dissipate that zeal that structuralists always had about them. And so you can see that post-structuralists become anti-heroic, they become comic, they become not so heroic as structuralist critics were. So that way we see that post-structuralism is introducing a very different line of thinking. I repeat, structuralism borrowed from linguistics, which values concepts of objectivity, concepts of description, concepts of neatness, concepts of classification. But post-structuralism, on the other hand, borrows from philosophy, which does not believe in that kind of neatness, where categories are more diffused and where categories are not so certain. Structuralism was very heroic in its intentions. Post-structuralism is not as heroic, but it is comic, or rather it is anti-heroic. And structuralism believed in certain theories of language, but post-structuralism is able to see the culmination of those theories, full implications of those theories. In other words, if structuralists can see up to a certain point, post-structuralists take that point to its logical conclusion, and they are able to see to the farthest point possible. That is about structuralism and post-structuralism. Now, if we talk further about post-structuralism and we try to define further what is post-structuralism, and we also try to see what is involved in post-structuralism, then we see that, okay, there is the influence of one important writer. Who is that important writer? Important philosopher? Friedrich Nietzsche. But before I come to Friedrich Nietzsche, let us also talk about some of those strands in post-structuralism. That means when we think about post-structuralism, we think about different positions within post-structuralism. We talk about different schools within post-structuralism. We talk about different critical positions within post-structuralism. And one major strand in post-structuralism is the work of Jacques Derrida. Jacques Derrida, French philosopher who had Algerian origins. Jacques Derrida is identified with a particular method of reading, a particular movement, a particular approach, which is commonly understood as deconstruction. Deconstruction. So, deconstruction is a major strand in post-structuralism. Then there is another major strand in post-structuralism, and that is the work of Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault was a French historian of ideas, and Michel Foucault has written a number of books. Some of those books include his History of Sexuality, which is in 3 volumes, History of Madness. Michel Foucault has also written about prisons. Michel Foucault has also written about different institutions, how they create certain discourses. So that way, Michel Foucault's work is very important. Yes. Now, Michel Foucault is a very powerful influence on different strands within post-structuralism. But we can especially talk about 2 approaches in post-structuralist theory that you will study later. They are new historicism and cultural materialism. And you can see the influence of Foucault on new historicism is very pervasive, and his influence of new cultural materialism is also quite definite, though there it is tempered by the work of British Marxist historian Raymond Williams. And the third very important strand is the work of Jacques Lacan and Julia Kristeva. Jacques Lacan was an interpreter of Sigmund Freud. And Julia Kristeva was also a very important feminist critic. So you can see here that deconstruction essentially talks about a certain kind of reading where Derrida read some important writers. Say, for example, he read Rousseau, he read Marx, he read many others, he read Hamlet. And similarly, Jacques Lacan, he also read some important writers, and in this case, he read Sigmund Freud. And similarly, Michel Foucault also read a few things. But basically, if we think about these approaches, they focus on different methods of reading. And so post-structuralism has different strands. One important strand is deconstruction, another important strand is new historicism, yet another important strand is cultural materialism, and another powerful important strand is psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis not of Freud, but rather how it is interpreted by Jacques Lacan. That means Freud as interpreted by Jacques Lacan. So mind you, you will hear this word psychoanalysis in a different context also, because Freud was talking about psychoanalysis. But no reading of psychoanalysis in present context will be complete unless you read Jacques Lacan along with Sigmund Freud. Right? So that means these are different strands. Similarly, there is the work of some other important writers which will come up in our discussion, and that is the work of number of feminist theorist. And so feminism, which started its journey in 1960s, and we are talking about the third wave of feminism, how it was influenced by certain other developments in post-structuralist theory. So feminism, especially in its post-structuralist avatar, is also very much the concern of post-structuralism. That means in post-structuralism also we are covering a lot of ground. By way of introduction, I must also tell you that there are some words which will be repeated again and again, and one such word is the word discourse. We'll discuss at length the connotations of this word, and because this word is central to the ideas of Michel Foucault, and this word is also in use everywhere. So we will talk about this concept of discourse. We'll also talk about the concept of ideology, and this word comes from Marxist theory. It comes from classical Marxist theory, but later the word ideology is further discussed, further refined by a thinker like Louis Althusser. So ideology is also central to the world of post-structuralism. And we can also talk about a word like linguistic determinism, or term like linguistic determinism, where one is talking about language becoming the most important concern of writers, seekers, and others. So linguistic determinism, that also is an important concept. And we'll also hear this word text very often, and we'll talk about the textual nature of knowledge. By textual nature of knowledge, we mean certain things, and here this concept will become important. So try to just see these terms: discourse, ideology, right, and linguistic determinism, and an expression like anti-representational view of language. These are all terms which you hear again and again in our discussion of structuralism, sorry, post-structuralism. So that means something which borrows from philosophy, and something which borrows from a whole philosophical tradition, but it also tries to interpret that philosophical tradition. There is no single position within post-structuralism. We'll talk about each of these positions. First, we will discuss deconstruction, then we will discuss say new historicism and cultural materialism, then we'll discuss feminist theory, and again we'll be talking about different texts, about different positions, right? So here I mentioned the name of Friedrich Nietzsche. He was a German philosopher. He is identified with some important concepts and some important books. Say, for example, the idea of Superman, or the idea of a man who is above good and evil, or the idea of correctness in interpretation. These are all concepts which have been discussed by Friedrich Nietzsche. So one particular concept, when he says that in our world there are no facts but only interpretations. In our world there are no facts but only interpretations. This is something very important, and if you think about its use in present day context, then it becomes very meaningful, because if you say that there are no facts, only interpretations, then you can explain the whole phenomenon of fake news, the whole phenomenon of the creation of news and its spread and its consumption and so on, and its effect. So there are no facts, only interpretations is an important concept. See another line from Friedrich Nietzsche. He said that there is no concept of correctness in interpretations. That means one particular text can authorize number of interpretations. So if you read a text, there can be as many interpretations of that text as possibly the people who read that text. And it implies that what a reader puts into a text he finds that there is no meaning in the text, but the meaning is simply that which he himself has put into the text. So ultimately, it is like becoming a master of a particular text, master of something. I repeat, there is no meaning in a text, and what ultimately man finds in a text is that which he himself put into it. There is no meaning as such. Whatever meaning is there, man has put that meaning into the text. There is no concept of correctness in interpretations. Single text can authorize number of interpretations. And similarly, he can say that there are no facts but only interpretations. Now, if we think about Nietzsche and if we see implications of his ideas to works of literature, we'll find that probably critics belonging to the school of deconstruction are greatly influenced by his ideas. Here I can give reference to one very major debate which happened during a seminar, and the seminar had M.H. Abrams as one of the participants. And another important participant in that seminar was Hillis Miller. Hillis Miller. We have already heard the name of Hillis Miller. Hillis Miller was identified with Geneva School of Criticism. That means when we study phenomenology, when we think about phenomenological reading of works of literature, we quote Hillis Miller's work on Thomas Hardy, where he talks about two elements in Thomas Hardy. And what are those two elements? Distance and desire. And Miller talks about this element of distance and this element of desire in the entire corpus of Thomas Hardy. But this was a different phase in Hillis Miller's critical career. Later, he joined forces with the School of Deconstruction, becoming a disciple of Jacques Derrida. So what happened in this seminar was that M.H. Abrams started talking about limitations of deconstructive theory. And he pointed out this fact that this deconstructionist theory borrows a great deal from the ideas of Nietzsche. And M.H. Abrams took a position that that position is wrong. He took this position that the view that deconstructionist critics take of language, that view is wrong. And he challenged their view whereby they said that a text cannot be understood or a text has no meaning as such. And he advanced his argument by first quoting Nietzsche, then by summarizing important ideas of deconstruction, especially deconstruction's take on language or the impossibility of meaning because of the slippery nature of language. And then he also pointed out that this position is not tenable. And he talked about his own position also, where he said that I believe that humanist scholarship offers something useful. And he also presented this view that even deconstruction will remain important, but not as important as it considers itself to be, but rather it will be one of the strands in criticism, teaching us something useful. But humanist scholarship will continue. Traditional scholarship will continue. That was M.H. Abrams' position. And then he also took issue with Hillis Miller. He said that Hillis Miller is noting down everything. Hillis Miller has written a review of my book, natural supernaturalism, and Hillis Miller has got certain points about my book wrong. But I know that Hillis Miller will explain my concept. He'll explain everything in a very clear language. In other words, M.H. Abrams was saying that deconstructionists talk about language being a slippery medium. They talk about language not being able to communicate something, but they themselves use this medium and communicate their ideas very effectively. So he pointed to a certain contradiction in deconstructionist theory. Right. Now, this argument or this debate was discussed a lot by later critics. And later, a particular kind of consensus also emerged. Not exactly consensus, but an overwhelming view was that Hillis Miller probably got better of M.H. Abrams in that debate when Hillis Miller talked about his concepts. This essay of M.H. Abrams is included in David Lord's anthology. And in the same anthology is the essay written by Hillis Miller, which is titled The Critic as Host. So from there also we learn something about the language of post-structuralism. Often in structuralism, you have very neat kind of titles. You have very neat kind of categories. But in post-structuralism, those categories are not so neat. Often the title of a work is used in a very playful manner. Often the title puns on certain words. And so when Hillis Miller gives this title, The Critic as Host, to his very important essay, then in that essay actually he is tracing the whole history of the word host. He is talking about certain meanings which this word has acquired over a particular period of time. He is talking about what is called sedimentation of meanings in this word. He is also talking about the slippery medium of language through this one single word, host. So that also suggests something about the nature of language as it is used in deconstructive criticism or in post-structuralist criticism. That language is often used in a playful manner. Language is often used in an anecdotal manner. Language is often used in a punning manner, where you can see a kind of pun on one single word. I conclude my discussion here on this point